turn?
Go for it.
Okay, I'm gonna load up my presentation here. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna say there's enough people here that maybe we'll hold the questions till the end or put them in the chat. I'm not gonna be able to see the chat while I'm presenting. And it's a pretty full presentation. There's a lot I'm gonna cover. Like I said, it's kind of for more the beginner intermediate people. Hopefully everybody will be able to learn something from it. And here we go. So this presentation, I'm calling it the Successful Apiary. And it's basically all, the presentation started out as like how I grew from 1 hive to 40 hives, because last year I overwintered. I ended up, the only thing that came out of winter was 1 hive. It was actually what's called the Queen Castle, and I'll explain that. And then during the course of the year, it just became my goal to expand, but I didn't really know how much. And then halfway through the year, I came up with the number 40. I was like, I'm going to get to 40. So, and I did, and all those bees overwintered successfully. Only a few of them didn't make it through, and it wasn't due to mites, which we'll talk about. Okay, so a little bit about me. This is my 7th year in beekeeping. I have a journeyman certificate from North Carolina State Beekeepers Association. I'm working on my master beekeeper certification. This is my first year queen breeding as like a sideliner. Last year was my first year dabbling in queens when I grew the apiary. Permitted, certified by the state. So the inspector's been here. He inspects my hives, and he works with me a lot just to, make sure everything's healthy and above board. So part of what's gotten me here is my mentors, which include Lena of our club. We're very lucky to have her. She has a podcast called Beekeeping at 5 Apple Farm, and I highly recommend it. I mean, we're so lucky to have her, and when she does her podcast, it's like I feel like she's talking to me. She always knows what I need to hear. And there's been so many times where she'll say something on her podcast, and I'm like, oh, I need to go check on that, and it's perfect timing. So she's treatment free, chemical free. She does mechanical treatments, which we'll talk about. It's not really a treatment. You're not putting anything in it. It's just how you physically work the hives that will help keep them healthier and lower mite counts just by, the actions you take. And then I also want to talk about my other mentor, Sam Comfort. He's a commercial queen breeder. He does queens in Florida and in New York. And so I was really lucky. It was kind of one of Lee's suggestions to do an internship. And he took me in February for 2 weeks, and I learned his system of queen rearing. And then now I do it on a small scale here in Burnsville. I'm also I'm going to work on opening a small bee supply shop out of my little walkout basement here in Burnsville for, all my customers that come and get nukes and queens, and all you guys, if you just need frames and boxes in a pinch. I'm hoping to have all that for you. Okay, so these pictures are of my apiaries currently. The one top left that's shaking, that's my main yard right next to my house. I pull a bunch of brood out of there. I pull nukes out of there. My cell builders I use to raise my queens are up in there. My breeder queens are up in there. And then these 3 other pictures are of my mating yards. So I rotate these 3 yards, catching queens every week. So, 1 week I catch them in one yard, and then later in the week I'll drop cells in there, and then I'll work the next yard the next week, and then I'll work the 3rd yard. And it's a really nice schedule. I know what I'm doing every day of the week. And I learned this system from Sam. It's just, I have to be organized to be able to function. and so I'm really grateful for this system. So the presentation, this was my friend Joe's quote after he walked the yard with me for a couple hours, and I basically, told them everything that's in this presentation. And this is what I share with my friends and new beekeepers all the time. So it's all that information in a presentation. So it's going to be a lot. You may not understand all of it, and but I just want you to be familiar with these topics so that when you have a situation, you kind of know where to look and what some of your options are going to be. So these horrible pictures here are of dead outs, these two. And that one little hive on the right is the queen castle that survived. The circle just jumped. That was my only surviving hive. I think I had like 5 or 6 colonies here that winter. And then this one jiggling, there's the queen. This is an example of what it looks like when a hive perishes due to varroa mite viruses infestation. It's a small little cluster that you're going to see. There's honey all around. You see there's honey in these pictures. So they didn't starve. They just die because they're weak going into winter because of the viruses that the varroa mites give them. So during the winter, every time you get a little cold spell, more and more bees start falling off of that cluster just because they're weak and they're not long lived. They don't have that vitellogenin maybe, or they're just not healthy to make it through. So that cluster gets smaller and smaller until it perishes. And this is kind of the telltale sign. So that was that last winter where I had the dead outs. And then this is this past winter. And you can see in the February 2020 picture and the November 2019 picture, they look identical. So from November to February, the bees basically stayed the same size. And this was because of the things that I learned, and I'm going to tell you about that keep your bees healthy and long-lived through the winter. And then there's my apiary on the top right, okay, of how many made it in the winter. So it was I ended up with about 35. I did make 40 queens, but I lost a few to equipment malfunction, making my own equipment. Okay, so what makes an apiary successful is your bees have to be healthy. It's like the most important thing. Healthy bees make more bees. Sick bees just dwindle out. Healthy bees will make your apiary profitable because now you don't have to be buying bees all the time. You're going to be making wax and honey and more bees for you. Makes it a lot more fun. It's more fun when, things are going well and you need healthy bees for that. And then you add queens. Queens are the backbone of your apiary. All you need is a queen to make a split, and you can make their own. And I'm going to teach you all different ways of making queens and growing your apiary. So the more queens you can make, the faster your apiary is going to grow. You can buy them, you can make them. I'm going to all that. But this is what makes a sustainable yard. A healthy bees and queens will make for a sustainable yard because you won't have to be buying bees all the time. Okay, tools to keep bees healthy. These are all the topics we're going to touch on this presentation. It's kind of self-explanatory, but you kind of got to be told. You got to put in the work. When you know something needs to be done and you have the knowledge to know it needs to be done, you got to do it in a timely manner because what you're going to need to do is going to change if you don't do it in time. You're going to have a bigger problem, a new problem. So it's best to just stay on top of things. Putting in the work, it's actually fun because it makes you a better beekeeper. And it's what we like to do, right? So let's do it. Don't be afraid to split. I think I heard Fat Bee Man say this on one of his Zoom meetings, and it totally resonated with me from when I was like a beginner beekeeper. I was afraid to split. It sounds stupid, but there's a lot of reasons why you, as a new beekeeper, are afraid to split. You don't want to take away from your hive. You don't want it to fail. But bees need splitting. You can split a hive so many times early in the season when it's not too cold and it just warms up. All those splits will grow through the year and do so well. But if you don't split them, they're gonna swarm, and then you might lose your hive. So it's, when you have splits, you have backups. So have fun with genetics and raise your own queens. Um, this makes a big difference in the apiary. An apiary that's like growing and has fresh queens all the time will generally be healthier than if you just leave a hive stagnant. And then we'll talk about what kinds of genetics are out there that could improve the health of your bees. It really can make a difference. And then mite count. So this is like the least fun thing sometimes, but it's like the most important thing. If it's like the only thing you do, it's kind of important as far as being able to read and foreshadow the health of your bees coming up. And a mite count basically tells you the percentage of mites in your beehive. I have a video here. If we have time, I'll show you how to do it. And then lastly is treatments. It's a last resort for me. A hive has to be basically going down and where I can visually see that they're sick for me to put a treatment on them, or a really, really high mite count where I don't want it spreading to my other hives. And then lastly, I'm gonna, after you do all this stuff to keep your bees healthy, to grow your apiary, you need to remember that they need food. It can happen quickly where if they're hungry, they're starving, they can just peter out and die really quickly. Also, different stresses come on when they don't have food. So we'll get into that, but basically just make sure that they always have a little bit of food. Okay, so this is a quote from my mentor, Sam Comfort of Anarchy Apiaries. I don't make rules for other beekeepers. So he's treatment free, but not stupid. That's another one of his great sayings. And basically it's like, everybody's got to keep bees however they want to keep their bees. Everybody has their own ways of doing things. So you got to do what works for you. Whether you treat or don't treat, it doesn't matter to me, as long as you're taking care of your bees and you care about the health of your bees. I think they can do well in all different kinds of care. Okay, so for you newer beekeepers, this is a varroa mite. I thought I'd take it all the way back to this because when I first started learning about beekeeping, I was reading books from the 80s that I had inherited from like a great uncle, and none of them mentioned varroa mites. And so I only learned about varroa mites like a couple years in. I would see it on the internet and I would try to ignore it, figuring that, where I live, they wouldn't have it, or that I could somehow skirt around it for a while I learned beekeeping. But that didn't, those bees died really quickly. Unfortunately, the first bees I had, and it was due to varroa vectored viruses, deformed wing viruses. So it came from Asia in the 1980s. So you'll hear a lot of beekeepers say that beekeeping was easy back then. You just put the bees in a box. And it's because this varroa mite has, I believe I heard it has like 30 something different viruses. I was trying to find where that is cited. I found something from 2006 that says they have over 20 viruses. And they'll have multiple viruses, not just one, but they'll have several of these viruses, and they'll attach between the little segments of the bodies, and they'll suck on the fat body of the plasma. So basically they're sucking on the blood and injecting at the same time these viruses. And these viruses were always in bees. But now, because of the mites, they're injecting the viruses straight into the bloodstream. So it's even more virulent for the bees. And then now, with migratory beekeeping and all different things that, are just normal in agriculture, and the treatments that we use, some of the chemical treatments make the viruses actually more virulent because the mites find ways around things. Okay, so that's why it's important to know about the varroa mite, as much as we want to ignore it. It's the one thing that really takes our bees down like 90% of the time. And the other 10% is like feeding and queen events and stuff. So I interject some pictures of queens in this presentation because it's just fun, especially when we talk about stressful things like mites. So here's a picture of Freckles from the side, and then from the top, she's got her little tattoos and her freckles. What kind of, she's probably an Appalachian. That's what she looks like to me. Okay, so putting in the work, the sooner the better. You'll know more and more what the bees need as you gain experience. So you just got to put in the time. And when you first start beekeeping, none of it makes sense. But over the first few years, I know there's some beekeepers out there, Robert, we've got a few of them, Sharon, who like just immediately soak up everything and learn everything immediately. But for me, it took a few years for everything to make sense, everything to click and understand what the bees are doing. I think by my third year, I could really understand the brood nest more and what's going on and read things a little better. It takes years to be able to really read it for most of us. So it's hard to think of them as livestock because they're wild, but they are your livestock. They are your pets. They're in your care. And the better you care for this wild animal that you've put into a box, the better they'll do. I put this in because it's really important. Joe Caps, I think, brought it to our meeting years ago, and I've shared it every year. Know your honey flow. I'm going to quickly move into the chat and throw a link, if I can. I want to take away from this. There's a link to it on our Burnsville Beekeepers Facebook group. If you guys want to join in on that, here's the link to the chart. I just put it in the chat. Okay. So this chart has, if I can get rid of the chat, it has when your sourwood flow is, when all your honey flows are. You'll have to look at this on your own time because I don't have quite enough time to go through it, but this is for Western North Carolina, approximately 2,500 feet elevation. Last year, everything on this chart was like dead on. This year, I was about 10 days behind on the summer flows, but you can write down what you're noticing in your own yards when things are blooming every year. And I keep these copies on my fridge, so I'm just always writing and I can always look and see past years. It also gives you good information about, when to watch for swarming, when to watch for robbing, when to watch for starvation, so to make sure they got food, when kind of you can anticipate to be putting your honey supers on. So as a new beekeeper, this is like a great timeline to help you kind of foresee what you're going to be doing and what's coming up. Okay. Okay, next, split. I talked about, not wanting to split as a newer beekeeper because I was intimidated. And that's just me personally. I know not everybody's like me. And then this is a little demonstration here, all these little splits you see coming up. This is how I went from 1 to 40. And basically, I just started splitting my hives. Every time there was a hive that was about ready to swarm or had swarmed, I'd take frames that had the queen cells on them and use each one of those frames with queen cells to make a new split. And then that's how I grew half the year from like the 1 to about 20. So these are bad reasons not to split. I kind of already went over them. I don't want to lose honey. It's more work. It sounds complicated. I don't know how. I don't know when. You got to learn to split as a beekeeper. It's just got to be embedded in you. And if you have too many, you can always sell them. Or give them away to your friends and help them. Okay, so these are the reasons why you should consider splitting. And maybe I should go back and explain what splitting is. Splitting is literally taking a hive and splitting it apart. The queen stays in one half, the other half or portion raises a new queen. So great reasons, bees need splitting. You are in control, so you're in control now of your apiary. Once you can make more hives, you're no longer, at the mercy of other people who can make hives. You can prevent swarming by splitting your hives. You know, you got to knock down that population sometimes so that they don't swarm on you. You can increase the size of your apiary. You can sell the splits, make backup nukes for overwinter. Having some extras over winter to replace any losses is great. That's like the logic of it, but to me, every hive is a hive. There's no such thing as a backup. And you can gain local queens, though. That's like awesome. As soon as you start making your own, you'll start seeing a little bit of an improvement. Unless you have like some amazing breeder queen already, even then you'll still get improvement, because they're going to be more locally adapted to your flows, your environment, your nectar sources, your temperature changes. And what else? So you improve your genetics by making splits. You make more honey because you have more queens, and more hives. And I'll teach you a split. I'll go over a split called the cut down split that actually gives you more honey. So when you do a walk away split, you basically do lose some honey. But when you do the cut down split, which Lee taught me, it's just the holy grail of splits. And we'll get into that. But you end up making more honey. And the last thing about making a split is the side of the split that doesn't have the queen, that has to raise a new queen, gets what's called a brood break. And this is a type of treatment. We'll call it a mechanical treatment because it is what you're physically, how you do, you're doing something to the bees. You're not adding a chemical. And when that whole time that they don't have a queen and they're raising a new queen, and she's not laying, all the brood is being, all the babies are being born out of the cells, and at some point you basically have no brood in the cells. Everybody's out, and they can clean the mites off of each other better. All the mites become phoretic, which means they're out on the bodies of the bees, and they can access them. They can't access these mites when they're reproducing under the cells. So when there's no queen in there for a little while, they actually get a little bit of a mite break due to that brood break. So say no to walk-away splits. I mean, you can do a walk-away split. There's just, I'm just going to teach you a better split that you should do when you can. And this is called the cut down. So say yes to that. This chart is found on Honeybee Suite, and this is a description of the cut down split. It's a little complicated at first, but once you do it one time, two times, it does become second nature. There's just some basics to it. The way you do this split, as opposed to a walk-away split where you just take that one half of the box and set it on another stand, or you could take two boxes, take one box off, set it on another stand, and walk away, or you can like split the whole hive in half, and that I think would still be considered a walk-away split. And so when you do a walk away, the queen goes in one with half the resources, but the other half is left without, well, that half with the queen doesn't get a brood break because she just keeps working. It's just the same hive, just smaller. So they don't really get much of a mite reduction. But the half that's left will get it. But if you do this cut down split, I'm going to teach you, the half that doesn't have a queen is sure to make an excellent queen. And so that's the one I'm going to just kind of go over because it's really the only one I recommend doing. I'd like to do, last year when I got my hives up in numbers, I did this 10 days before every honey flow. And you can refer to that chart to do this type of cut down, this split. 10 days or less, because you really want that food coming in to make that well-fed queen, and it's going to make you more honey because everything's going to hit right on the right time to make tons of honey, if that's your intention. Like any hive that gets large 10 days before a honey flow, I apply this split, right? So for the old hive, so you take the hive, basically, you got to find the queen. That's the main thing of this hive. And I know it's hard at the beginning when you're first learning, but if you're focused and you're dedicated and you give yourself enough time, generally you'll find the queen. So you take the queen out of the hive, And another nice thing about the cut down split is you can do it in the exact same bee yard. You don't have to take the bees to another yard 2 miles away so you don't lose all your foragers. This one you can do in the exact same bee yard right next to the original hive. So you go in that original hive, you take the queen out and you put her in a new hive, let's just say right next to it. And then you go through that original hive and you take out all the brood that's capped, which means all the larvae that has a cap over it. The older larva, all that, actually, sorry, that stays in the old hive. You want to find all the open larvae, all the young larvae and eggs, and that's going to go in with the new queen, with the old queen. So in the new location is the old queen and all the open brood. And in the old hive, no queen, all the capped brood, right? And so this is going to make them make a new queen, and you got to leave them 1 frame of eggs. That's the one thing. They only get 1 frame of eggs. If you leave them more frames of eggs, they'll use those eggs to make queen cells. And that's okay. You just, you can use those to even make even more splits if you want down the road, once they draw them. But, and then you're going to take all the honey and put it with the old queen and all that open brood. So in the old hive location, there's no queen, there's all the capped brood, and you can take all the honey away from them because they're going to have all the foragers. Since they're in the original location, they're going to have all the foragers to feed the new queen that they're raising. The new hive is going to lose all those foragers, but that's okay because you're going to give them all a bunch of honey, all the honey off the hive. So that queen, she'll just kind of chug along for a little while, and they'll live off the honey stores in there, and they'll start growing. That is the basics of it. And I know it sounds complicated, but once you do it, it won't be so complicated. And this chart from Honeybee Sweet, if you just print it and keep it with you, I think really will help. So the benefits are you make more honey in the old hive location. That hive that has no queen, you're going to have to end up putting supers on it because since they have no open brood to feed, the only thing they're feeding is the queen set, that frame of eggs that they're making queens on. They have all those foragers have nothing else to do except put that honey up. They don't have the bees in the hive don't have a bunch of young larvae to feed. So all the honey that comes in the hive basically goes up in the supers except for what's used to make you some really nice, well-fed queens. You'll get more hives by the cut down split because you'll now have your split. And if she doesn't get mated, if that split doesn't work out, you can always merge it. If you did leave them maybe more than 1 frame of eggs, you could, once they draw those queen cells on it, you could pull them out. It's a little more advanced, but you could pull out and make yourself even another little split, and you could use a little nuke box for that and just throw 2 frames in there, and that just increases your odds of getting more queens. And you prevent the swarm. So this is the tricky part about the cut down split. Because you took the queen out, you're preventing a swarm. And anytime I see a hive with queen cells and an egg in it, I just go find that queen. I pull her out immediately to prevent her from swarming, from losing that queen. But because you have all that brood left in there and they're all going to be born, you don't want to leave too many queen cells in that split because it's so full of bees that they could still swarm even with a virgin. So you only want to leave like 3 queen cells in there in your split so that they don't swarm, all those bees don't swarm on you. Okay, so the old hive gets a brood break because they don't have the queen, and you all that capped brood that you left in there, it all emerges and gets born, and then they can clean all the mites off of it, and you get the well-fed queen. Can't really see all my little details here. Just a note, always try to breed for improvement. So If you don't like the genetics of the hive that you're splitting, maybe they're mean, you could always take a frame from a nice hive, take a frame of eggs from a nice hive, and use that as your frame of eggs for them to raise a new queen off of. It's just something to think about. Okay, I'm gonna try to keep moving. I know that was a complicated topic there. So I want to expose everybody to queen castles. This is like, I learned this my third year, I learned what this was, and it is a game changer. It's a 10 frame beehive divided into 3 or 4 sections. So you can use way less resources to make a split. You can make a split with 2 frames basically. And I use these to overwinter in. I overwinter really well on them, surprisingly. So I encourage y'all to experiment with overwintering small configurations. The main thing is the bees just have to be healthy. As long as they're healthy and they have food, they'll make it through. So get yourself a queen castle. And Data is not the only company that sells it. There's Midnight Bee Supply here in North Carolina. There's other companies, but I do like the one that they make. This is a video of what a queen castle is, just to show you. Throw a frame, each frame that has cells on it, into your queen castle, and then wait about 3 weeks and come back and see if you've got anything on it. Whoops. So that's the queen castle. It's my workhorse. Hopefully I don't have to go through the whole video here. Sorry, guys. Okay. I just figured for newer beekeepers, I'd show you these pictures of what queen cups and swarm cells look like. So when you see them, you'll be familiar with them. And that's when I say, like, when I have a bunch of these, you can throw them in the queen castles and let them emerge in the queen castles and get mated there and increase your odds of how many queens, you get. Like, and Lee calls this frame-based queen rearing. So if you have queen cells on like 3 different frames, you can leave one in the hive for her to, populate that hive, and then throw the other 2 extras in your queen castle or nuke boxes, and not have to use a ton of resources. So these are your queen cups and swarm cells. There's that one was almost, the one top right is not capped yet. The ones on the bottom right are all capped. And the way they hang on the bottom kind of shows you, it indicates that they're swarm cells when they're really numerous. As opposed to an emergency cell, it's kind of important to know that will come straight out of the worker cell and down. It won't be as long because it basically comes out and down. It's crooked. The top left one is a queen cup. Whenever you see those, just look inside and see if there's an egg in it. If there's an egg in it, it's what Lee calls they're charged. It means they're getting ready to swarm. They're thinking about that. Well, it's going to happen probably in the next few days, as soon as they cap that queen cell. Okay, so I grew from that one queen castle that overwintered last year to about 20 hives, just taking my extra swarm cells and putting them in nukes and things like that, and letting those queens get mated and growing those out. But my goal was to hit 40. So I knew I had to start doing some grafting. That's how you can really grow exponentially. So here's some of the tools I use and what's included, what goes into grafting. That left photo with the tool in my hand, you go into the cells and you pull the little larva out of the cell. You're looking for a larva that's about 24 hours old. So they're real small and real skinny. And then you put them in those little green cups I've got there. They can be all different colors. The cups kind of correlate with who the queens are. So I always know who the queen is based on the color of the cup. And there I am working with the flashlight. So I could still, I want to get some different things to improve how I can see, a bigger magnifying glass, a better LED light. Here's kind of a picture of how small they are and what you're looking for. And I want to say even smaller. They're real skinny and real small. They're about the size of an egg, just a little bit bigger is what you're pulling out. And then those cells go into a queenless hive, and the queenless hive will draw, called the cell builder, and that cell builder will draw those queen cells out for me. This is another method I thought I would tell you guys about. It's called the Hopkins method. It's one of the first things I did. So before I grafted, I was like looking for ways to make a lot of queens real quick without having to learn grafting. So I first tried this Hopkins method. I took one of my shims, my little 2-inch shims. You lay that on top of a hive, and then I fastened like a strip of wood across it to hold the frame. I had to modify it basically a little bit so that I could put a frame that had eggs sideways, like horizontally on top of the hive. So that's, you can see into it. It's not on top yet, but that just has the rim. And then here you see the frame that was going to go on top, horizontally. I scored it every inch. I made a strip to score it so that, and then I made strips horizontally every inch, and then vertically across every strip, I pushed in like every inch. So basically, so that the cells that they draw out could be separated. If they do all the cells in a row, you won't be able to separate the queen cells. So by kind of manipulating the frame that went on there and damaging cells in between, good eggs, I would be able to cut the cells out easier when they drew them. This also has to be done on a frame that has no plastic foundation or any kind of like foundation that's not pure wax, because you're gonna have to be, you need to be able to cut the cells out. And then here it is laid on top of the hive sideways. And so, I mean, that was a really simple way to make queens without having to graft. You do, sacrifice portions of the frame and whatnot. But if you just want to make a batch and maybe get 10 queens out of it and not have to buy more new equipment and all the grafting stuff, you could try this. And you don't have to be able to see larvae. So that's why I wanted to share the Hopkins method. It's a pretty cool introductory way to kind of grow your apiary quick. Here's what the cells looked like on the Hopkins method. They stick straight out. It's kind of weird. Normally cells go down vertically. But here they stick straight out because the frame was sideways. And then here you see the cut out of the comb. And you're really not supposed to hold them upside down like that, but you can see it. Okay, have fun with genetics. What are we at? 7:50. I'm gonna keep moving as quick as I can. So typically when you learn about queens and what you can, when you see what's available, they give you two options. One is Italian, and the standard for an Italian queen is that she's light in color and that she's gentle, a good honey producer. She overwinters in large clusters, so you got to watch out, make sure they got food over winter, and they don't burn it up too quickly in the spring. And then the other option you typically get is Carniolan, which just means she's darker in color typically, and they're known for being winter hardy and conservative with their food stores. All the queens that I sell are hybrids, and any queen that you buy that's mated, open mated, is most likely going to be a hybrid of these two. I think the idea is just to kind of keep these traits in line with basically the color bee. It's hard to say unless you're getting genetic testing if they're really truly Italian or Carniol. And so here's some options I would encourage you, if you can find, or if you have the ability to do so, to use instead. Local, so making your own, buying from people who are in your club or in the area who's are, the queens are locally mated, so they're more adapted to your area. Hygienic, so hygienic is an option. You'll see VSH, which means Varroa sensitive hygiene. These bees, these the daughters of these queens have the skills to sense if a pupa is infested with Varroa and remove her from the cell to lower the mite count in your hive. There's other hygienic traits in bees. I noticed in mine, they open up the cells towards the end, like when the bees have already pupated in the cell, they open it to change the humidity of the basically the mites in the cell. So the mites are, as I understand, very sensitive to the humidity, certain humidity changes. They reproduce better at the right humidity. There's also ones called mite biters. They chew the legs off the Varroa mites. So if you see that, that's a more recessive trait. I was breeding off of one of those queens, but the VSH is a very dominant trait. You're more likely that your queen will have that trait. And those were bred by USDA in Baton Rouge, the VSH. One of the breeders who sells, who USDA has entrusted with selling the VSH is VP Queen, whom we've been trying to get their breeder queens, but they have a long list of people that want them. And I'm gonna do an internship with them in September. So hopefully I'll get to come home with one of my VP VSH queens. Okay, so another option is survivor stock. So if you know somebody who's had the same line of bees for a long time, we have a few people in our club, obviously Lee Knott, her survivor stock is, the best known. She's just keeps not putting treatments on them and keeping them under her conditions. And these are the ones that have done the best without treatment in our area. So that's survivor stock. And I was lucky to get some eggs and larvae from her to do a batch of her queens, which sold out really fast. And I have to make sure to keep some. Oh, and then, yeah, anyways. So hopefully we can do more of that next year of her queens. And then I've done some other like bee tree stock. You have a tree that's had bees in it for 10 years and they swarm, it'd be cool to try that stock out because they haven't been treated and they've done well in that environment. Granted, there's caveats to that. Because they're in a totally different environment. They're not being kept by beekeepers. So maybe keeping them in a similar situation would benefit them better. Okay, so this is hygienic behavior. This is kind of what I was telling you about the uncapping that you see. If you see stuff like that in your bees, that's a good sign that they're working towards keeping the mite load down. Here's another picture of a queen, just to break it up a little bit. This is the Cherokee queen. She was a bee from a bee tree survivor stock. And she was great with honey. So far, everybody's been pretty happy with her, very gentle. Nice wide hips. Okay, for mite counts, this is like the not so fun, but I'm just gonna give you the cliff notes. Basically, mite count tells you the percentage of mites in your beehive. You have to keep it, you want to be at 1%, less than 1% coming out of winter. If it's higher than that, then you're already starting with a problem. And then you can go up to 3% in the summertime. It used to be you could go to 5%, but because the viruses have gotten stronger, the new 3% is now the new 5%. And what'll happen is when you start creeping up over the recommended threshold, you'll start to see the spotty brood pattern where it looks like a shotgun, you know, like it's just holes, random holes in your brood pattern. It's not all nice and smooth and even with just a few little holes where they got honey. You might even see your population decrease really fast, and that's when they're like infecting all your other hives. Basically, they're drifting. Okay, so that's the cliff notes on that. I think I'm going to skip over this because I want to get through this without everybody falling asleep, and it's already 8 o'clock. And I have a little video on how to do mite counts, how to find out the percentage. It's on my YouTube if you look up Moral Bees on YouTube. The method I use is called the sugar roll method, and it uses powdered sugar. You need a few things for it, and I'm going to skip that today, but Lewis Cobble, our inspector, shows us a lot how to do that, the mite counts. He comes to our club picnics and stuff and shows us how to do it. There's a lot of information online. I had a first year beekeeper teach me how to do a mite count. Lewis Cobble, our inspector, is also a mentor, and he was always talking about mite counts, and I never knew what my mite counts were. And finally, I kind of got the hint that if I didn't, learn how to do mite counts, he was not going to take me seriously. And the reason I put it on here and I mention it, even though it's not the most fun thing, is because it was crucial to keeping my bees healthy. Being able to see what their percentage was and act accordingly, either with a brood break or, if it's super high, the mite count, just to go ahead and treat it just to clean it up so it's not infecting all the other hives. It made a huge difference. And I hate to skip it, but I know it's a long presentation. So on your own time, look up sugar roll mite count. You can also do alcohol wash. The alcohol wash kills the bees immediately. It's 300 bees. But it's easier if you have multiple hives, to do it that way. But I still use the sugar roll method. And then we're going to go to swarm traps. I did a presentation a few years ago on how to set swarm traps. Swarm traps are basically your beehives. You can use old beehives. You can make boxes out of plywood. It has to have certain dimensions, and basically 20 to 40 liter box with a small entrance hole on it. And you can bait it with lemongrass, oil, kind of. It attracts the bees, the swarms to it. Or you can buy a bottle of Swarm Commander. It's $30, but it's worth it. And it has the essential oils that attract the swarms to it. But basically, and you can spend a whole year learning about swarm traps, and you can set them all over town and all in your friends' yards and stuff like that to catch yourself some free local wild bees. The reason I want everybody, especially new beekeepers, to have a swarm trap in your yard 100 to 150 yards away from your bees if possible. It doesn't have to be 30, 40 feet in a tree. It can be, 5 feet off the ground, as high up as you can get it, where you can safely retrieve it if it does have bees inside of it. The place that you're going to look for information about swarm traps would be Tom Seeley. You can look up his YouTube videos on honeybee democracy. Basically, it's his presentations about his book, Honeybee Democracy, which is fascinating. Great read for the winter. Learning all about the behavior of swarms is just so fascinating because you can read what they're doing and you'll understand what they're doing. It's not such a wild concept anymore. The first swarm you see is just epic. But okay, so I'm teaching you about swarm traps because they're great as insurance against losses. So like I said, put your swarm trap 100 to 150 yards away from your bees if you can. If not, that's okay. And that way, when and if your bees do swarm, and if you can't reach them or you're not home, you don't know that it happened, they may appear in your swarm trap. So you don't have to lose your first swarm you know, and you can do more. I like to have two swarm traps up just to see which one they prefer, you know, which location or which box. What else can I tell you about the swarm traps? Oh, if you get swarms from like, you know, outside of your bee yard, then way outside your bee yard, then obviously they're not your bees. And I would definitely recommend keeping them off your property for a little while, just to make sure they don't have American foul brood, European foul brood, things like that. And doing a mite count on them, because they can carry a lot of mites. And they, you know, these feral bees, they may be resistant to some of the diseases that they carry. So when you bring them into your bee yard full of these mites, even though they can live with them, your bees may not be able to live with them. Okay. And this is off of a PDF that Tom Seeley has online about bait hives. Basically, you want it 15 feet off the ground. Tom Seeley in his presentation puts them 2 feet off the ground, not even on a crate. So it can be any height. Don't kill yourself. Don't get hurt. It likes to be, it's good to set them like on the perimeter of the forest. They like landmarks. So if it's like at the base of a cool tree or something, that helps them find it. Small entrance. Obviously facing south is preferred. We kind of went through all this, but just, you know, Tom Seeley, bait hives, really important, just for not losing your bees at the beginning. It'll, you know, losing bees is having less. And if you put them in if they move into your swarm trap, it's a natural thing for them. They just split themselves naturally and you caught them. So that's a win-win. Here's a picture of one of my black queens. She's kind of black and gold. She's pretty. She's probably one of the VSHs. Here's pictures of healthy brood. Granted, there could be mites underneath these cappings. When you see a lot of brood like this, it's kind of when the mite load's creeping up. But this is what healthy brood patterns look like, just for reference. I should put a spotty brood pattern, but I didn't. And that one on the left, that's from the box hives. Sam Comfort, I was telling you about, he makes these beehives that use combs instead of frames. You just use little bamboo skewers over the top of the boxes that they draw out. It's very natural. It's fun. It's a little bit different. Okay, almost last is treatments. I'm not an expert on treatments. I only have used formic acid, which is Mite Away quick strips, and oxalic acid in vaporizing form and in liquid dribble form. So these treatments are to deal with your varroa mites if they get out of control. There's a tool, and I'm just trying to give you guys all the tools for when you run into things and where to go to get help. So this varroa management decision tool on the Honeybee Health Coalition website, everybody who's anybody in bees or has any kind of anything to benefit from bees has basically put money into this Honeybee Health Coalition. All the almond pollinators, all the state beekeepers associations, I think some of them even, it's like the good, the bad, everybody is helping with this Honeybee Health Coalition. So they really want, and they get all the information on the latest information on varroa mites, which is constantly changing. So I just wanted to show you the tool. We're going to walk through it real quick. So if you went on the website, you use the app, it's going to ask you questions. So are your mite levels exceeding treatment threshold? And even though you're probably only going to use this when yes, the mite levels are above threshold, I'm just going to tell you what some of the things that they would tell you if they were not, real quick. They would say, you know, good, your levels are still good. Maybe use a screen bottom board. That can help about 10% of your mites fall through the bottom. Good sanitation, which would be like rotating out old comb, like old black comb that's been in there for 4 or 5 years, or you don't know where it came from, because it could harbor fungicides, herbicides, old diseases and things like that. So just getting rid of the old and help having them make new. Drone brood removal is an option. If you see a frame that's just full of drones, you could stick it in the freezer. There's a lot of little things. These are the mechanical things you can do to keep your mite levels down with, before, and hopefully not have to use chemical treatments. And then requeening. So you could requeen with a hygienic queen, and then your brood interruption, which will help bring your mite levels down some. And then let's say, okay, you did your mite count, and yes, your mite levels are above threshold. We're going to walk through it like we're doing it right now. Do you want to use organic or synthetic? Of course, I'm going to prefer organic. That's how I do my garden. And also the organic treatments are less likely to build up in the comb, in the wax, to be absorbed by the wax. In the hive. Okay, so yes, brood is present right now, right? Because they're making tons of brood, unless they're honey bound. So you'd say yes, brood is present currently. If it was October, there might not be brood in it. Do you have honey supers on? Yeah, I don't see any reason to treat when you have honey supers on. Just do it before, ideally, or do it after. Just take your honey supers off and then do it. But if you're in a pinch and you feel like you need to do it with the honey supers on, there's options. And then the last thing is going to ask you where your population is. Is it at peak? Is it decreasing or dormant? So peak would be summer right now. Dormant would be winter, when they're hardly making any brood. So these are going to be the options that they would tell you to use. The Mite Away Quick Strips. This is the formic acid. So this stuff penetrates the cappings, kills the mites underneath the cappings, which is great. If you have a high mite load and you need it to work quickly, this stuff works well. It can kill your queen, and they keep formulating it to be softer and softer. It is organic. These are organic options, believe it or not. You can, they're just, in higher concentrations than you would find in nature. The Hop Guard I have not used. I think you have to use it for over a long period of time. And then grayed out is the oxalic acid, and that's because in the United States you can't use it with honey supers on, but in Europe you can. And you got to stay with what your country says. You want to stay above board here, but that's a good one to use when there's no brood in the hive. So when you catch those swarms, if they have a high mite count, you use that oxalic acid on them, and it does a great job of cleaning up the mites off of them when they don't have brood. Okay, so this is important. If you end up with a hive that you do have to treat, you want to do your mite count afterwards to make sure it works. Some of the synthetic stuff doesn't always work because the mites are becoming resistant to it. And even with some of the organic stuff, if you don't use it correctly, maybe it isn't effective. So it's important to make sure that it actually worked and that your levels went down. And then lastly, you go through all the work, you got these beautiful healthy bees, just make sure they don't starve. It happens so easily, especially in the springtime. They're building up, they're doing beautifully, you figure they got food, and then you just have a week or two of rain or cold spells. This year was kind of miserable in April. And I had to feed a whole lot, because to avoid starvation. What happens when they start starving is they'll start robbing each other out. So everybody starts crashing quickly. But even more importantly, maybe not more importantly, but when they're stressed for basically any reason, diseases can pop up, just like in humans. The more stress on your body, it doesn't, your immune system's not working as well, and stress-related diseases pop up. And I'm thinking of European foul brood, sac brood, and so feeding during stressful times, like in the spring, can help prevent those diseases from popping up, which then you'll have to deal with. So feeding the bees is important to avoid starvation. Sugar syrup ratios 1:1 in the spring and 2:1 in the fall. So the 1:1 means 1 part sugar, 1 part water, and this stimulates a nectar flow, and it stimulates the queen to lay. It's like, okay, food's coming in, let's get this brood nest bigger and growing. It's a great way to grow your apiary in the spring. Just make sure, give them a break. Don't feed them like all the time. Don't keep the syrup constantly on them, because you're just gonna stop them up and they'll swarm. So feed them, give them a few days of no food, feed them again, give them a few days of no food. Just kind of, Lee calls it like trickle feed, slowly feed. You can even put less holes in the mason jar tops and things like that, just to slow the feeding down. But just kind of make sure they always got food. And then the 2:1 is in the going into winter. It simulates more of a honey, because it's 2 parts sugar, 1 part water, so it's thicker. So they put it up like honey for the winter. This winter feeding, so I don't do much for winter. I put 1 piece of insulation on the top, and I put tape around the boxes, because I'm pulling the boxes apart, ripping the propolis seams that they've made apart, and they won't be able to glue it all back together probably in time for winter. And in nature, in a tree, beekeepers not going to be pulling it apart, exposing these seams. So I put tape around the edge just to kind of like reseal those seams, so the wind's not cutting through them. Insulation on top, and then this is the feed that I use. This is another suggestion of Lee's. This is called the mountain camp method. Basically, you don't need any special equipment. That's what I love. I've tried making quilt boards. I'm not really good at making stuff. Pine shavings falling through my beehive and whatnot. You just pour your little 4-pound bag of sugar right over the inner cover of your beehive. Leave them a little hole so it's not falling into the hive. And as the moisture from the hive rises up and hits the lid, it drips down onto the sugar, softening the sugar a little bit for the bees to eat, but at the same time absorbing the moisture, so it's not raining back down on the bees, and it keeps the hive drier over winter. So to me, it's like perfect. It doesn't hold as much as some of the the things that you can make to put on the hive, but 4 pounds is quite a bit. And I don't mind lifting up the lid in 40 degrees, 50 degrees, just to check and see how much is left, and then pouring some more on. So here you can see how much they've eaten away at it. And then, on a nice day, I might refill it. And it gives you an idea of how well the bees are doing also, and how fast they're eating their food, what they've got left. That's in the bottom right, that's one of my in-hive feeders. And I'll put sugar in there too over winter time. Just pour dry sugar in there. But during the year, I keep one of those feeders, the frame feeders, in the hive all year. I like to just keep them in the boxes the whole year, so I can feed them whenever I want to. And there's no robbing because it's inside the hive. So overwintering. So in order for your bees to make it through winter, basically, they need to stay that big cluster as long as they possibly can. So they need to be healthy to do that. I put the sugar on top, and I tape up the seams. So with this system, all these things that I've learned over the years, and actually implementing them, you have to do the work. That's what I was telling you. I feel way more confident that I can stay in business next year, that my bees are going to do well, and they're going to be healthy. I'm not worried like, oh, well, can I promise people nukes? Like, I know I'm going to have nukes next year. I'm not worried about that anymore. So I'm definitely more in control of my bee yard, having my systems in place, and having my bees healthy and being able to make queens. That's a big thing. That's why, healthy bees plus queens, it makes your sustainable yard. So I'm still learning. I still have a ways to go. I'm trying not to burn out. What really, one of my greatest joys is helping my customers. And when they're like, they say their hive's doing really well and they're having fun. Sometimes it's challenging, but I love helping them through all that. And that's that. Moral Breeze, this is my contact information. I'm here in Burnsville, so y'all can come visit. You can come see my operation. Just email me. I'm on Facebook, and I'm always happy to share. But at least you guys already got the talk, so I don't have to give you the talk again. Okay, is everybody still awake? Did I lose everybody?
Debbie has everybody muted.
Okay.
Thank you so much for doing that. That was really informative. We're going to open up and let some people ask questions. Debbie, do you want to control the questions with hand raising, or how do you want to do this? I mean, I don't want to have like 10 people trying to talk at once.
I will try to control the hand raising. So who would like to ask a question? You go to participants and raise your hand, I think.
While we're waiting for hand raisers, I will just give a plug to Michelle. I've gotten several queens from her this year, and they have all survived except for the one virgin Appalachian queen that did not come back mated. But everybody else is doing really well, and I've been really pleased with it. I've had a survivor hive for 11 years, same genetics, that's still going strong. So I feel like this was a nice addition to have queens from the tree hive, queens that you've raised out of your own apiary. I didn't get one of Lee's queens, but then I guess in a way I already had one. That's the survivor hive that I've had for almost 11 years. So I can't complain. But it's been great. It's been very comforting to me to know if things are starting to look a little wonky. I'm like, oh, I'll call Michelle, see if she's got some extra queens. So I'm glad that you're doing this, and I think it's been a huge boon to our chapter. So I'll stop there, and I'll let Debbie take over and control the mob here. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Susan. I'm glad they're all doing so good for you, and we'll get you one of those queens. Don't worry. But that's funny that Lee's is still. I still have one of Lee's hives from many years ago that I got from her. They do so well. And it's okay if we don't have a bunch of.
Emily is asking Emily is asked what the podcast is, 5 Apple Farm. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so Emily's my friend. Well, you're all my friends, sorry. Beekeeping at 5 Apple Farm, that's Lee Knott's podcast. You can find it on Apple. You can find it on a bunch of, just Google beekeeping at 5 Apple Farm, the number 5. And depending on what kind of devices you use, it's on all the different platforms, that podcast. She has a bee school too now, which is great for all you noobs. And she always just says exactly what you need to hear. I think it's a great podcast. And she has such a soothing voice. It's perfect. I liked when she used to do the readings. Somebody complained they didn't like her readings, but I love those. You're welcome, Rachel. Holler at me anytime if you got any questions. All you guys, I'm happy to help walk you through any queen events you're having. I don't know everything, but a lot of times I can give you some good advice or some tips what to look for before you buy a queen. I don't want you to waste your money. If you've got something going on, there's other things I can do to help you with. Yeah.
Hey, can you hear me, Michelle?
I can hear you.
Why don't you tell the new beekeepers how to, if they do a split, I mean, not probably now in the season, but if they do a split, how to requeen, like if they come by a queen from you, how do they then get that queen in with the queenless half of their split?
How to install the queen?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say you make a split and you don't want to raise the queen by yourself, or let's say she didn't come back mated, something happened to her on the way home. I'll give you, I don't want to run out of the picture, but I'll give you what's called a queen cage with the queen in it. And ideally, come pick them up on Tuesdays and Wednesdays because that's when I catch them and they're nice and fresh. And the fresher they are, the more easily they're accepted into your beehive. They're unshipped, which makes them even more readily accepted. So they'll come in this cage. The cage has a tube in it, and the tube is full of candy that I make. And it takes the bee, when you install the cage between the frames, you'll lay the cage right in between the top of the frames in your brood nest in the middle. And you squeeze it right in there, and in about 2 days, the queens will chew through the candy and release that queen. And during that 48 hours, give or take, they will have become accustomed to her scent, and they will have spread that scent around the hive. So once she's released, safely released 2 days later, she's already been accepted. And then she'll start heading up your new hive and laying eggs within a few days. When they're really fresh like that, there's about a 90% acceptance rate, except, if you make a split. If you're coming to me because you need an emergency queen, your acceptance rate's going to go down because there's a lot of things that could be happening in your hive while they're queenless. But like a virgin running around, or they might have laying workers. And so just if you do contact me for a queen, just let me know kind of what it's for, and I'm happy to kind of help you with that if it's an emergency queen and give you some suggestions. But if you make a split, it's good to like contact me. If you know you're making a split, it's good to put the queen in. About 24 hours is the perfect amount of time to install a queen after you make a split for best acceptance. By 48 hours, they start making their own queen cells and things, but it's still okay a couple days later. They have that time to get acclimated to her. So make the split and install the queen 24 hours. And if you want to get a queen from me, if you want to try some new hygienic genetics or you want local genetics, just kind of like get in touch with me first so we can figure out when you're going to get the queen, so you know when to make the split. You can kind of work it backwards that way and try to time it so it's that perfect little 24-hour window. But anywhere from 4 hours to 48 hours is really okay after you make the split to install the queen. Any other questions? It's a lot of information, but I'm hoping I kind of covered as much as I could to so you guys know, understood. Sounds like you did.
So, Michelle, how much longer will you have queens for this year?
So basically, I think 1 more week. I'm going to sell my queens next week. And then the queens after that are sold out. Those are the ones from Lee. And then after that, I think all the queens I make, I'm going to be keeping to overwinter in my queen castles. I'm going to try to overwinter just shy of 200 queens, maybe like 175 queens throughout between all my mating yards and everything, so that I could use those in the spring to make nukes to sell, nukes to new beekeepers and people, who just want more hives. So basically I'm going to be selling queens for 1 more week if anyone needs queens or wants to make splits. But I will be selling queen cells, which are only $5. And so basically I'll have the queen, I make my queens by making queen cells. I showed you the grafting. And those queen cells I put into my mating nukes, which is the queen castles mostly that I use. So I will be selling queen cells later in the year, but those you have to wait for the queen to go get mated and return, which is about a 60 to 70% return rate usually on the queens if you want to make your own with the queen cells. And it's just good to get with me a little bit in advance. I can do last minute sometimes, but for the most part, it's good to get your orders in advance if you know you want to. Like right now, I have like some pollination people who are buying a lot of queen cells because they're making a ton of splits right now. And then, and it's a good way to get good local you're already local, but it's a good way to get local genetics too, so they're locally mated in your yard. So we'll have queen cells probably through September, end of August probably. And then I'm going to wind down. I have to teach my son's school this year. We have to do virtual school, so I'm going to learn how to do that and switch over. If anyone wants nukes, I'm going to start my list for nukes. Just contact me, and I'm going to do a deposit in February on my nucleus colonies to secure them for anyone who needs any. Okay. Any other questions?
Well, if we don't have any more questions for Michelle, then I think we could call this evening a success. And I'd love to hear from you on what you think about having Zoom meetings and whether this worked for you. This is certainly a small number of people by comparison to what would normally come to an in-person meeting, but it's nice to see a lot of your faces. I haven't seen you since February. So send me an email, a private message on Facebook, or Debbie or Ed, any of us, or John. I haven't seen John on tonight, but I imagine he's probably hiding somewhere. Any of the officers, let us know what you think of this and who you'd like to hear from, and we'll see if we can't get some more of these going. Try to get in maybe one a month or one every 6 weeks or so, if this works for you. So we'd love to hear from you. Looks like a couple more chats came in. Let's make sure there aren't any questions for you.
I can do another presentation, like a photo slideshow. It'll be a lot shorter, I promise, on my time with Sam Comfort in Florida. He's really creative. He's a genius. He like invents things and like his own beehive. And so I can show you pictures of a lot of things I learned there with those different box hives. And we can do that later in the season if you need a speaker.
Yeah, that actually, I would love to see that, just to let the rest of the chapter know. Michelle introduced me to Sam earlier in the year, and he's working on a pretty good sized project on what makes a good queen, all the different parameters that go into it, and it's actually a quite quantitative research project that's being funded by a number of research organizations. And I get the honors of being his statistician, so I'm going to get to see all the data before everybody else does, and I'm pretty excited about that. So yeah, we've gone big time here. Yeah. So I would love to see that presentation, and I think we should probably put it into works for maybe sometime this winter, since we won't be limited by bad weather. I think Zoom meetings could actually go on throughout the year. So that's something we could consider. I say that, I imagine Debbie Griffith, who put this together for me, is probably getting my voodoo doll now and getting ready to stick pins in it. But I don't see any reason why we can't try to keep something like this going. And I would love to see something on the comfort hives and the comfort method.
He's moving. Well, he's not moving. He got a place in Rutherford 10. Nobody even knows this really. So he's going to be around more. I'll see if I can get him on. He doesn't always have the best internet, but I'll try to invite him on also to our meetings, see if he'll join us. Maybe we can get him as a speaker.
Most of us don't have the best internet. Okay,
might be
well,
able
if anybody,
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry.
I was going to say we might be able to get him as a speaker too. I'm going to mute myself so I don't talk over anybody.
Okay, Debbie, anything else we need for tonight?
I don't think so. I really appreciate it, Michelle. You did a great job, and I have recorded this, so you can share it however you would like to. So thank you again.
And don't forget to end the session, Debbie.
I won't.
Thanks everybody for
Okay.
hanging in.
Thanks, everybody.
Hope you learned something.